Imagine being so hungry you trade your entire future, your inheritance, your status, your birthright, for a single bowl of stew. It sounds like a myth, a moral story, but it wasn't. In the ancient world, this humble dish was known as the poor man's meat. It fed Roman citizens, sustained King David's fleeing army, and powered laborers who built entire cities under the desert sun. But the real mystery isn't history, it's biology. Because this simple red stew contains more usable protein than eggs, delivers slow-burning energy without crashes, and sustained people through 16-hour days with nothing else. So why did entire civilizations rely on something so cheap? What did they understand about food that we've forgotten? The truth is, modern nutrition didn't discover anything new. It's only just catching up. This isn't just a meal, it's the fuel that built empires. To understand why this simple stew was worth a birthright, we have to look at the world it came from. In the ancient Levant, energy wasn't something you bought in a neon-colored can at a gas station. It was a matter of life and death. If you ran out of fuel in the middle of the Galilee wilderness or during a forced march across the Judean desert, you didn't just get tired, you died. The people of the Bible weren't eating for aesthetics, they were eating for biological resilience. We've been conditioned to believe that the gold standard of human nutrition is a thick cut of red meat. We see the paleo diets and the carnivore trends, and we assume that our ancestors were constantly hunting big game. But history tells a much different and much more interesting story. In the ancient world, meat was a luxury reserved for the elite or for rare religious festivals. It was expensive, it spoiled quickly, and ironically, it wasn't the most efficient fuel for sustained grueling labor. The true engine of the ancient world was the pulse. Specifically, the red lentil. Archaeologists excavating ancient Galilean settlements have found something startling. In the storage jars of the common laborer, the men who built the massive stone structures that still stand today, they didn't find animal bones in high concentrations. They found charred remains of lentils. These people were performing impossible feats of physical strength on a diet that modern gym culture would dismiss as poverty food. But here is where the mystery deepens. If you look at the nutritional profile of what we call the poor man's meat, you start to realize that the poor were actually the ones with the biological advantage. Modern nutrition focuses on macros. How many grams of this or that can I fit into a meal? But the ancients understood bioavailability and sustained release long before those words existed. When you eat a steak, your body gets a massive hit of protein, but it also takes a massive amount of energy to break down that animal tissue. It's a heavy, taxing process that often leads to the food coma we've all experienced. But the biblical lentil stew was engineered, yes, engineered through centuries of traditional preparation, to do the exact opposite. It provided what scientists now call slow-release complex carbohydrates, paired with a protein density that rivaled beef without the digestive tax. This is why King David's army, when they were exhausted and fleeing from Absalom, were brought wheat and barley, flour and parched grain, beans and lentils. They didn't need a feast, they needed a recovery protocol. They needed a food that would repair muscle tissue and replenish glycogen stores simultaneously. We live in a world of empty spikes. We eat high-sugar, highly processed foods that give us a 30-minute burst of energy followed by a devastating crash. We are more fed than any generation in human history, yet we are more fatigued. We're overcaloried and undernourished. The ancients had the opposite problem. They had very few calories available, so every single one had to count. They couldn't afford a crash. They needed a 12-hour burn. The red lentil was their secret weapon because of a specific fiber-to-protein ratio that is almost non-existent in modern engineered foods. It's a biological cheat code that regulates blood sugar while flooding the system with iron and folate, the very building blocks of red blood cells. But if this food is so superior, Why did it become the poor man's meat? Why did the rich man choose the steak if the lentil made the soldier? The answer lies in a dark irony of history. For 2,000 years, we've been told that Jacob tricked his brother Esau. We look at Esau as a fool who traded his entire future for a mess of pottage. We assume he was just a hungry guy who made a bad deal. But here is the truth that changes everything. Modern archaeological science and chemical analysis of ancient cooking vessels suggest that this wasn't just a soup. It was a highly concentrated, fermented and sprouted biobooster. And here is the pattern interrupt. Esau wasn't just hungry. He was suffering from a specific acute physiological collapse that only this specific stew could fix. In fact, if you look at the original Hebrew texts and the biology of the ingredients, Esau didn't just want the soup because he was hungry. He wanted it because, in that moment, the poor man's meat was the only thing on earth more valuable than a kingdom. Because, as it turns out, the rich man's diet of the ancient world was actually a hidden poison that was slowly destroying the ruling class from the inside out. The kings of the ancient world were dying of success, literally. While the laborers in the Galilee were moving limestone blocks that weighed tons, the ruling elite was suffering from a mysterious, agonizing disease of the rich. We now call it gout, a brutal buildup of uric acid caused by an overindulgence in purine-rich organ meats and wine. The high-status diet was actually a slow-motion biological sabotage. It caused systemic inflammation, brain fog, and joint failure. But here's the kicker. The poor man's meat wasn't just a survival food, it was the antidote. When you look at a red lentil under a microscope, you aren't just looking at a legume. You're looking at a tiny armor-plated battery. But there's a catch. If you eat a raw lentil, it's useless. It's actually toxic. It contains lectins and phytic acid, anti-nutrients, designed by nature to protect the seed from being digested. So, how did the ancients turn a toxic seed into the most powerful fuel on the planet? The secret is in the clay pot. The 2,000-year-old cooking process didn't just heat the food, it biotransformed it. The ancients used a triple threat method: soaking, sprouting, and long-form simmering in alkaline clay vessels. This process neutralized the anti-nutrients and effectively pre-digested the proteins. By the time that stew hit Jacob's bowl, the protein was already broken down into its constituent amino acids. It was an ancient version of a hydrolyzed whey isolate, designed for near-instant absorption. But why did Esau, the ultimate alpha hunter, need it so badly that he'd trade his inheritance? Modern sports physiology gives us the answer. Imagine Esau coming back from the field. He's been tracking game for days. He is in a state of acute glycogen debt. His blood sugar has bottomed out. His muscles are catabolizing themselves for energy, and his brain is screaming for survival. In this state, a steak is useless. A steak takes 4 to 6 hours to process. Esau didn't have 6 hours. He was experiencing a bonk, the physiological wall that marathon runners hit when the body shuts down. He needed a delivery system that provided an immediate glucose spike for his brain, but a slow-release protein burn for his muscles. The red lentil is the only food in nature that hits that exact biological sweet spot. It contains a specific type of resistant starch that bypasses the small intestine and fuels the gut microbiome, providing a 12-hour steady state of energy. But it gets deeper. It wasn't just about energy. It was about the color. Why does the Bible specifically mention the red pottage? In the ancient world, color was a marker of chemical potency. The red pigment in lentils comes from anthocyanins and polyphenols, the same high-level antioxidants we pay $15 a bottle for in super juice supplements today. These compounds are massive anti-inflammatories. For a man like Esau, whose body was riddled with the oxidative stress of the hunt, that red stew was a biological system reset. He wasn't a fool trading a kingdom for a snack. He was a man in physiological crisis, trading a future he couldn't feel for a survival he desperately needed. And this leads us to the most controversial discovery in ancient Galilee archaeology. When researchers analyzed the mineral content of the soil where these biblical lentils were grown, they found something staggering. The ground was naturally saturated with high levels of magnesium and molybdenum. Molybdenum is a trace mineral that most people today have never heard of, but it's the primary cofactor for the enzymes that detoxify the body of sulfites. Without it, your liver can't process toxins, your energy production stalls, and you feel a chronic heavy fatigue. The poor man's meat was effectively a heavy metal detox and a mitochondrial booster hidden in a 10-cent meal. The laborers of the Galilee weren't strong despite their diet. They were strong because of it. They were operating on a level of cellular efficiency that modern man, with all our supplements and biohacks, can barely touch. We've been taught to look down on the poverty of the past, but the chemistry tells a different story. The poor man was the one with the clean arteries, the 12-hour stamina, and the high-performance mineral profile. But if this food was so superior, why did we stop eating it? Why did we trade the fuel of empires for the empty calories of the modern world? The answer is found in the Industrial Revolution of the 19th century, where we made a fatal trade-off. We chose shelf life over human life. We stripped the fiber, removed the minerals, and killed the fermentation processes to make food that could sit in a box for years. We created a world of empty spikes. And the result? We are now living through the Esau collapse every single day. We are tired, we are inflamed, and we are trading our long-term health for the quick fix of processed sugar. But what if you could reverse it? What if you could use the exact same ancient recovery protocol that King David used to bring his army back from the brink of death? It's not just about buying a bag of lentils at the grocery store. If you cook them the modern way, you're missing 70% of the benefits. There is a specific 3-step activation sequence used by the ancient Galileans that unlocks the molybdenum and neutralizes the lectins. It's the difference between a bowl of gas-inducing beans and a biological cheat code for your metabolism. And when you see what happens to your blood sugar stability, when you apply this 2,000-year-old cooking secret, you'll realize that Jacob didn't just win a birthright. He won the secret to human longevity. But there's one more ingredient, a hidden component of the biblical stew that historians have overlooked for centuries. A single spice that, when combined with the red lentil, creates a synergistic effect that increases iron absorption by over 400%. Without this one final piece of the puzzle, the poor man's meat is just a meal. With it, it becomes a medical-grade performance enhancer, and the recipe has been hiding in plain sight in the ancient texts all along. The hidden catalyst, the one final ingredient that transforms this stew from a simple meal into a biological powerhouse, is cumin. But not just any cumin, it's the stone-ground, aromatic seed of the Levant. For centuries, we thought it was there for the earthy flavor. We were wrong. Modern clinical studies now confirm that cumin contains a unique compound called cuminaldehyde. When paired with the red lentil, it triggers a massive release of bile and pancreatic enzymes, essentially pre-warming the digestive engine to handle the high protein load. But more importantly, when the ancients added a splash of fermented vinegar or a squeeze of wild citrus to that red pottage, they were performing a masterclass in chemistry. The vitamin C in the acid binds with the non-heme iron in the lentils, increasing your body's absorption of that iron by over 400%. This is the ancient recovery protocol in its final form. It wasn't a fluke. It was a calculated, multi-generational system of survival. The activation sequence used by the builders of Galilee followed 3 non-negotiable steps that you can still use today. First, the 24-hour soak. This isn't about softening the seed. It's about signaling to the lentil that it's time to wake up. This process neutralizes the phytic acid, the anti-nutrient that steals minerals from your body. Second, the sprout. By letting the lentil just barely begin to germinate, the starch is converted into simple sugars and the protein is pre-digested into amino acids. Third, the alkaline simmer. Cooking in clay pots provided a gentle mineral-rich heat that kept the enzymes intact, while the long-form simmer broke down the complex fibers into the 12-hour slow-burn fuel that powered King David's men. This is why Esau was willing to trade it all. He wasn't a fool, he was a man whose biological systems had hit zero. He was experiencing the Esau collapse, the moment when the body, starved of real nutrients and overtaxed by the heavy, inflammatory diet of a hunter, finally breaks. Jacob wasn't just a cook, he was a biohacker 4,000 years ahead of his time. He held the system reset button in a clay bowl. When you understand this, the story of the poor man's meat changes from a parable about greed into a blueprint for human excellence. The laborers of the Galilee weren't building the world's greatest monuments despite their poverty. They were doing it because they had bypassed the rich man's sabotage. They had the clean arteries, the steady blood sugar, and the iron-rich blood of a modern elite athlete, all funded by a handful of red seeds. We have spent the last 100 years looking for the secret to health in a laboratory, chasing the next synthetic molecule or the latest super supplement packaged in plastic. But the secret wasn't in the future. It was in the Levant. It was in the steam rising from a heavy clay pot. It was in the realization that the humblest food on the planet, the poor man's meat, is actually the most sophisticated fuel ever designed by nature. Every time we choose the empty spike of a processed snack over the slow burn of the ancient pulse, we are making Esau's trade. We are giving away our long-term vitality for a 30-minute high. But we don't have to. The activation sequence is still here. The red lentil is still the same biological battery it was 8,000 years ago. The ancients knew that to move mountains, you didn't need the food of kings. You needed the fuel of the earth. They knew that the real birthright wasn't a title or a chest of gold. It was the physical and mental clarity to lead, to build, and to endure. This isn't just a recipe from a dusty book. This is the restoration of the human engine. This is the moment where we stop being overfed and undernourished. We are finally reclaiming the biological wisdom of the Galilee, realizing that the most powerful superfood in history has been waiting in our pantry all along. This is the fuel that built empires, and it is the only fuel that can rebuild us. Every day you are standing exactly where Esau stood, holding a modern empty spike in your hand, while your birthright, your long-term vitality and mental clarity slips away. But the red lentil is only the first chapter in a much larger, forgotten manual for the human machine. The history of the Galilee is not just a collection of stories, it is a repository of high-level biological intelligence that has been systematically erased by an industrial world that profits from your chronic fatigue. The activation sequence we've uncovered today is just the beginning. There are more hidden catalysts buried in the soil of the Levant and the ancient texts, from the specific neurological protocols used by the desert mystics to stay alert for days, to the forgotten mineral ratios that turned common laborers into the builders of the impossible. We are currently in the process of decoding these ancient survival mechanisms, one biological cheat code at a time. If you've realized that modern supplements and synthetic fixes are just a poor imitation of the fuel that actually built empires, then you are part of a rare group of people ready to reclaim their biological inheritance. We are moving deeper into the Levant, searching for the next piece of the puzzle that modern science is only now beginning to understand. If you want to ensure that you are no longer overfed and undernourished, if you are ready to swap the rich man's sabotage for the poor man's meat, then you need to join this excavation. Do not let the next secret remain hidden from your pantry. Stay with us as we rebuild the human engine and restore the ancient wisdom of the Galilee. Your reclamation of the slow burn begins now. Make sure you are here for the next discovery.